something that someone was sitting on that you didn't get out here before
I mean, just to that, it just seems to me that we're also facing, we understand that there's a great democratization of kind of creativity and artistic expression, and this is happening regardless of whether or not we know, we're going to figure out how to handle it. I mean, there's stuff happening in basements and garages and everywhere and on the internet, and that to your point, it's not only that we can use these processes to engage people to reconnect or connect for the first time with what the relevancy of what we do, but it's also if we don't embrace it, it's already ahead of us.
I want to just make one connection and editorialize for one moment. You mentioned, Jim, and kind of under your breath that you can give these people time, not so much money. That's what you can give them. It's a small thing in a way, small in the sense of its impact on the budget, perhaps. Lisa, you were talking about time in the theater, and ideally that theater would be used in some other way, but actually it's being used for this way, that it's available. We have actor
it's not
housing.
That small.
Yeah, I mean, we're paying for it, right? I mean, it matters. But I just think that these are the kinds of resources that it's interesting. Sitting around here for the first time, I'm thinking, oh, this is what we can learn about how to support the traditional, what's quote unquote the traditional play process as well, from the way that we're trying to figure out how to support this kind of work. That resources come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and it may not always be that we can write a paycheck for something, but that doesn't mean there's not something that is sitting there that's needed to keep the infrastructure moving.
But we need to be writing more paychecks.
And we need to be writing more paychecks.
We really need
To the artists.
Right, but I don't want it to be the reason we don't do the other things.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
access to your prop room, can transform an ensemble who's never had access to a prop room.
Thank you.
The idea that you don't have to buy it or build it yourself, or that you could rehearse for 6 hours in a row, can be transformational to some ensembles who have never allowed to take time off their day jobs. That is
Reed Mex talked about that at Humana a lot, right?
Yeah. They were like, oh, we come here all day. Okay.
I mean, the first time we had actual scripts in our hands.
Yeah.
That we were able to go somewhere to actually Xerox scripts. I mean, for us, if you didn't memorize it, it wasn't in there. We didn't memorize it. So to actually have scripts that we can go to the Xerox machine, it's there was one script, no, you can make 4 or 5 different scripts. That was a big deal in the early days. It's shit, we got scripts. So little things like that, it really, really did help make a difference.
Now you're in the big leagues of text-driven companies at OSU.
It's all over now.
I think Arthur Miller worked with the same memorization idea with the actors.
And the strike pianists.
We're going to go ahead and, go ahead, Susie. Sorry.
I just want to say there are people representing institutions in this room that can write checks.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out how to connect the check writers with the space providers. I mean, we write checks, and we do some space, but because we're an educational institution, most of our space is taken up with teaching. So trying to find the connections that allow us to put our checks in the most effective place and make the best partnerships is something that is always a challenge for us, particularly around devised work.
Yes.
It is not a problem for us in dance and music.
Great. I'm going to nice work. This is really great, and then we'll get to the last breakout where everybody can deal with this. Susie's just brought up something that will come back, so hang on to it, which is this notion of aligning the resources that we do have and how do we do it. And it's one of the things I'm hoping that we can figure some way to proceed on as we go here. All right, can I have Camilla Forbes, Diane Ragsdale, Greg Reiner, Jane Preston, Katie Pearl, Kirkland, Mayan Wang, Mark Masterson, Sabrina Hamilton, Megan, is Megan here? She wasn't here earlier. Juan, yeah. Oh, great, thank you. Sorry, didn't see you for the earlier table, so great. And Susan Feldman. Is Susan even here? She didn't make it, did she? Susan didn't make it, so I'm going to have a chair for somebody who wants to jump into the table and talk about bright spots. Oh, it's gone. That Diane. No, we have 2 Dianes at the table. It's going to be confusing. And I'm sorry to all of you on watching online who I just switched your whole plan based on who is or isn't at the table, but it's live. All right, so what I want you guys to be thinking about as we all settle in here, bright spots. Where in the infrastructure are we seeing movement toward better support, more creative ways of supporting the ways that new work is being made, what we're calling devised work. Oh, I have another chair. Someone who wants to come do bright spots for devised work, please join us. Where are you seeing the trends that we should be noting here today? What organizations, individuals, initiatives that are underway? I know that Jane brought one to the table that she's even got literature on back there.
Yes, everyone pick up one of these brochures, which is for the National Theater Pilot that we are doing with the Mellon Foundation and Diane and Mark and Mayan and David and lots of the people in this room. So it's a rich conversation. And when you say bright spots, I think about the session that we did at Under the Radar, where we talked about this system of support, which is based on a system that has been very important. It is always called critical to the dance field, which is to support a system that supports the production of work and then the touring of work and helping to make those connections, and has a standing group of advisors who then mentor some of those projects into the field and start making some of these. So trying to connect that money with the group of people who can influence, hopefully getting that to be a wider circle so there's a real network of people seeing work and interested in trying out some of this devised work in places like Susie, saying that the presenters it's a way for bringing in theater, but also seeing how important, thinking of the conversation the advisors had on how important the developmental partners are to really launching these projects into this world that may or may not be familiar. So in that session at Under the Radar, lots of presenters showed up. And Stephen and Mildred talked about their process with universes and what the money for production is enabling them to do in terms of connecting with some communities. KJ Sanchez talked about how the work that she's doing in military bases is now starting to get interest of theaters, as well as those military-based theaters that may be places that other work can go. So just turning that whole thing sort of around. And then the Worcester Group talked about how much touring they get in Europe and how they get support there for the development of their work, and can we start to move some of that into a system in the US. And it was just thrilling. I mean, we didn't even invite some of those people to come, and just
Just showed up.
Yeah, and really what we're trying to do with this pilot phase is to find different ways that this money and the connections can help projects. And we're not even necessarily doing those of you, I keep looking at Diane and David because they're at the table and reviewing all of this work. And it's really about looking at some different models of how does this deploy into a touring system that really doesn't exist for theater. But the layers of the developmental partnerships that we're talking about here are so important to this conversation. It's not just connecting with the tour sites, it's really connecting with sort of the start to finish of how that work gets created and then gets out there.
Mm-hmm. Who else? Bright spots in this area?
Greg from Tectonic Theater Project. I would say that definitely some of what Susie was talking about, what's happening with Rob Orchard up at Arts Emerson and many presenters around the country that are university-based is a big bright spot for us. I'm sure a lot of us, the device companies like us, have it in common. Moises Kaufman, our artistic director, and I have been talking with a lot of people like civilians, Elevator Repair Service, all of these kinds of city company, our peers that are doing this work, that we don't have what we developed this terminology, we don't have what we call the 3 S's, which are season, space, or subscription. And usually we develop work and it takes a long time to develop it, I think the original Laramie project that we took 5 years to write. And so, how do you sustain yourself over that period of time and allow the freedom to do it? And sometimes we'll develop things for a long time and there won't end up being a play there. That's part of the trial and error, the research and development that, a pharmaceutical company, to take a for-profit example, would invest in one pill is going to cure cancer, maybe. Something's going to do something you didn't expect it to do, like Viagra. And something might not do anything at all, but you have to invest equally in all of them to find out what's going to work. So having research at universities.
So where are you getting that support?
So where are we getting that support? Well, having the bright spot of someone like Susie to create that kind of work is great, or Rob
Where
Orchard
else? Yeah, Rob
specifically.
Orchard. Who else?
Those are, well,
I don't want to put you on spot,
that's
but
fine.
there are others.
Hopefully NIFA. Diane McMillan was very generous to us this year. Doris Duke helped us out this year. So there are some people who get it, but they're not, and they're doing it through,
And you're getting some through
TCG.
institution, like producing theaters as well, right? I mean, La Jolla.
We have in the past, and I think what Diane does, another broad spot I was going to say, what they're doing at Center Theater Group, not to say their name again, to take these, because we need, like somebody said in the last one, having a prop shop. I mean, in rehearsal, to be able to say, I think I want a golden toilet seat, or whatever. That was actually from Bengal Tiger. But to say that, and then it shows up in rehearsal the next room, this golden toilet seat.
Yeah.
Because if it was just us in New York without a space, we might make something out of cardboard, but we couldn't physically go create that.
Who else?
So my name's Katie Pearl. I'm an independent artist with a long-term collaboration with a playwright named Lisa D'Amour, and I'm also here representing sort of the new work scene in Austin, Texas. And Austin is a special place, and Kurt can speak to this too after I do, in that there's no Lort theater there. There's no kind of big theater to anchor it. And so as a result, there's been this, since the early 90s, and I guess probably before that, a lot of energy of theater makers coming there, just making their own work and forming groups to do that. So there's devising is, I suppose, what lots and lots of us do in groups. And because there's not the traditional support there, we become a really, we have this term now, I suppose, a loosely affiliated, mutually supportive group of artists. And what David encouraged us to do and Diane encouraged us to do is apply to the Mellon Foundation for funding to figure out if we can create a system of sharing resources and information that will sustain the entire community. So, and we're just at the beginning of doing that, but it's a complicated and really exciting question, but our hope is that other small communities like New Orleans, AMA is here, and I know they're starting to have those conversations, but how can this community that's built on conversation and interest and support create the infrastructure for this kind of work that looks in all sorts of different ways that the institutional model that isn't in Austin anyway doesn't seem to be able to provide. So we're this week, I'm actually leaving tomorrow to go do the first retreat of the Austin community for this grant, and it's really exciting. So, but definitely the support of and the interest of the Mellon Foundation, I think, is pouring a huge amount of energy and import into this kind of question, which is great.
As a cool little example of that, somebody from Salvage Vanguard and somebody from the Rude Mex had this idea that they would start the scenic co-op where when